My parents were beaming in the front row, their faces lit up with the kind of pride I'd never seen them wear for me. They were ready to watch their perfect daughter Isabella receive a style award. She sat next to me, adjusting her cap, smug and entirely unaware. 3 months ago, when I begged them for $4,200 to buy materials for my final thesis, they laughed. My mother's exact words were, "You're strong enough to build with trash, Brianna. Isabella isn't." They thought they were here for a simple ceremony. They had no idea I was about to be called to the stage first. They didn't know the dean wasn't about to praise Isabella's eye for fabrics. He was about to unveil the Blind Commission, the most prestigious architectural project in the city, bought anonymously by the top firm. And the builder wasn't their golden child, it was the daughter they discarded. I watched them whispering, smiling. They had no idea their quiet little betrayal was about to go public. I just sat there waiting. Their faces were about to go pale. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been the one doing the heavy lifting while someone else stood in the spotlight? I want to hear your story. To understand why I didn't scream when the dean walked to that podium, you have to understand the architecture of my family. It wasn't built on love, it was built on a very specific load-bearing calculation. I was the steel reinforcement buried in the concrete, invisible but essential. Isabella was the facade, the marble cladding they put on the front to impress the neighbors. 6 months ago, the cracks in that structure started to show. We were both students at the institute, but we lived in different worlds. Isabella was studying interior design. Her curriculum seemed to consist of selecting velvet swatches and attending networking brunches. My parents provided her with what they called a lifestyle stipend, $250 a week. They said it was necessary for her creative process. She needed to be surrounded by beauty to create beauty. So she bought imported silks and drank espresso in high-end cafes, curating mood boards for imaginary penthouses. I was in architecture. My reality was brutalist. I didn't have a stipend. I didn't even have a meal plan. While Isabella was touching fabrics, I was dumpster diving behind the industrial fabrication labs at 3 a.m, looking for scrap steel. I learned the schedule of the janitorial staff so I could drag rusted beams into my studio space without being caught. I slept under my drafting table more nights than I slept in my own bed, wrapped in a coat, because the studio heating shut off at midnight. I smelled like ozone and grinding dust. Isabella smelled like vanilla and expensive lease agreements. But the disparity wasn't just at school. It was woven into the drywall of our actual home. Last winter, a heavy storm tore a hole in the roof of my parents' house. Water was leaking into the master bedroom, threatening to ruin the hardwood. My father didn't call a contractor. He called me. He said they were tight on cash because they had just put a deposit down on Isabella's study abroad trip to Milan. I didn't argue. I drove home. I climbed up onto the slick, freezing shingles with a tarp and a nail gun. I spent 6 hours up there fighting the wind, patching the leak, saving them $10,000 in repairs. When I came down freezing and exhausted, my mother was in the kitchen showing Isabella a brochure for a villa in Tuscany. They didn't offer me dinner. They didn't even say thank you. My father just nodded and said good. It stopped dripping. It wasn't just the roof. The sunroom they bragged about to all their friends, I drew the blueprints. The landscaping that won the neighborhood award, I calculated the drainage slopes. I was the sweat equity. I was the labor that kept their lifestyle standing upright. But in their minds, my labor didn't have value because they didn't have to pay for it. It was a resource they felt entitled to, like running water. I remember standing in the kitchen that night watching Isabella trace her finger over a picture of an Italian vineyard. She looked up at me, her eyes bright and vacant, and asked if I could drive her to the mall later because she needed new boots for the trip. She didn't see the frostbite on my knuckles. She didn't see the exhaustion pulling at my eyes. She only saw her own reflection. That was the moment I started keeping a ledger in my head. I stopped seeing them as family and started seeing them as a failing investment. I realized that no matter how much steel I poured into their foundation, they would never let me inside the house. I was just the contractor they forgot to pay. And the bill was coming due. 3 months ago, I presented my final budget to the board of directors. That's what I called my parents in my head. I laid the spreadsheet on the kitchen counter next to a swatch of Italian velvet they were considering for Isabella's new condo. I need $4,200, I said. It wasn't a question, it was a procurement request for my capstone, the final thesis. I need structural steel, industrial resin, and access to the high-grade laser cutters. It's required for graduation. My father didn't even look up from his tablet. He was scrolling through a listing for a sectional sofa that cost $6,000. That seems excessive, Brianna. Can't you use wood or recycled plastic? You're always so good at making do. I'm not building a birdhouse, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm building a brutalist study on urban resilience. It needs to be steel, and I don't have the money. I spent my savings fixing your roof. My mother finally looked at me. She touched the velvet swatch, running her fingers over the nap, soothing it like a pet. We can't do it, honey. We just put the deposit down on Isabella's furniture. You know how sensitive she is to her environment. If her apartment isn't soft, she gets anxious. She can't create in a harsh space. I'm sleeping under a desk, I said. That's my point, my mother said, and she smiled. It was a terrible, benevolent smile. You're tough, Brianna. You have grit. Isabella. She's delicate. You're strong enough to build with trash. She isn't. The room went silent. The refrigerator hummed. The velvet swatch looked soft and expensive. In that moment, I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't cry. For years, I had wondered why I tolerated this. Why did I stay in a family that treated me like an employee they forgot to pay? Why did I keep fixing their roofs and balancing their ledgers when they gave me nothing? It wasn't loyalty. It was conditioning. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. I realized then that I had been trapped in a prison without bars. My parents had trained me to believe that my only value lay in my ability to endure pain without making a sound. They had convinced me that being low maintenance was a virtue, when in reality it was just a discount they were applying to my existence. I stayed because I thought if I cost them nothing, they would keep me. I thought my silence was the rent I paid to belong to this family. But looking at my mother caressing that expensive fabric, the chain snapped. I wasn't being praised for my strength. I was being exploited for it. My resilience wasn't a badge of honor. It was their excuse to neglect me. They didn't love me because I was strong. They loved that they didn't have to worry about me while they poured their resources into Isabella. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at my parents. Okay, I said. See, my father beamed, relieved he didn't have to open his wallet. I knew you'd figure it out, you always do. Yes, I said, I will. I picked up my spreadsheet. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the kitchen, out the front door, and I didn't look back. I wasn't going to build with trash. I was going to build something that would cast a shadow over their entire lives. And I was going to do it without a single cent of their money. I didn't go back for my clothes. I didn't send a text to explain. I treated my departure like a business liquidation. I cut the losses and moved the remaining assets to a secure location. The first asset I liquidated was my car. It was a 5-year-old sedan, reliable, the one thing I actually owned. I drove it to a used lot an hour after leaving my parents' house. I walked out with a check for $3,800. It wasn't enough for the high-grade industrial steel I needed, but it was seed money. For the rest, I traded my sleep. I walked into a metal fabrication plant on the south side of the city. I knew the foreman from a previous supply run. I offered him a deal I would work the graveyard shift, sweeping the metal shavings and managing the inventory logs if he let me use the CNC machines and plasma cutters between 3 and 5 in the morning. He looked at my hands scarred from years of fixing my parents' mistakes. He didn't ask why an architecture student wanted to work third shift in a steel mill. He just handed me a pair of safety goggles and said, "Don't break my machines." So I went cold. I stopped answering my phone. I blocked my mother, my father, and Isabella on everything but email, and I set a filter to send their messages directly to a folder I named Paper Trail. I needed a record of their neglect, but I didn't need to hear their voices. My life narrowed down to a single razor-sharp focus. Sleep was a variable I minimized. Food was fuel. My studio became my bunker. 3 weeks in, Professor Douglas found me. It was 4 in the morning. I was asleep on the concrete floor of the university studio, curled up under my coat next to a welding rig. I woke up to the sound of a cane tapping against a steel beam. Douglas was the kind of architect who believed buildings should outlast civilizations. He didn't do pity. He looked at me then, he looked at the prototype I had been building. It wasn't a delicate model made of balsa wood and glue. It was a terrifying, jagged structure made of raw, darkened steel. It looked less like a building and more like a fortress designed to survive an air raid. You're living here, he said. It wasn't a question. It cuts down on commute time, I said, sitting up and rubbing the grit from my eyes. He walked around the model. He ran his hand over a welded joint I had spent 6 hours perfecting. This isn't a student thesis, Brianna. This is a statement of war. It's a study on urban resilience, I corrected. It's angry, he said. And it's brilliant. He pulled a flyer from his leather satchel and slapped it onto the drafting table. The Blind Commission. The city's top firm is buying one project sight unseen based purely on structural integrity and innovation. No names, no pedigrees, no politics, just the work. I looked at the flyer. The deadline was in 2 days. Isabella is entering the interior design showcase next door, I said. My parents will be there. Good, Douglas said. Then they'll have a front row seat when you bury them. I took the flyer. For the next 48 hours, I didn't leave the studio. I poured every ounce of rage, every year of silence, every moment of being overlooked into that steel. I built a structure that couldn't be ignored. It was brutalist, heavy, and undeniable. It didn't have soft velvet interiors. It didn't have a facade. It was pure load-bearing strength. I submitted it anonymously 5 minutes before the deadline. Then I went to the bathroom, washed the grease from my face, and put on the one dress I hadn't sold. I was done building. It was time for the inspection. Back in the auditorium, the lights dimmed, casting the audience into a hushed, expensive twilight. The air smelled of champagne and ambition. My parents were busy charming the man seated to their right. They didn't know who he was, they hadn't bothered to read the program, but they knew he wore a suit that cost more than my tuition, so they decided he was worth impressing. I sat silently on their left, listening to them construct their favorite fiction. Isabella has always had such a refined eye, my father whispered to the stranger, leaning in with a conspiratorial smile. We just provided the canvas. She's the artist. We nurtured that sensitivity. You have to protect true talent, you know. You can't let it be exposed to the harshness of the world. The man nodded slowly, his gaze drifting over to me. And your other daughter, he asked. His voice was low, gravelly. Is she an artist too? My mother let out a small, polite sigh, the kind she reserved for explaining disappointing service at a restaurant. Oh, Brianna is practical, she said, patting my hand without looking at me. She's sturdy. She likes to get her hands dirty. We let her do the heavy lifting, so Isabella has the space to dream. Everyone has their role, don't they? Yes, the man said, his eyes locking onto mine for a fraction of a second. I suppose they do. Then the stage lights flared, cutting off the conversation. Dean James walked to the podium. He didn't look like a man about to hand out a student award. He looked like he was about to declare war. Tonight is not just a graduation, the dean's voice boomed through the hall. It is a revelation. 3 months ago, the most prestigious firm in Chicago, Vanguard Architects, approached us with a unique proposition. They wanted to commission a project blindly. No names, no pedigrees, no family connections. They wanted a design that spoke to the future of this city. A design based purely on structural integrity and resilience. My parents shifted in their seats. They were confused. This wasn't the style award script. Isabella stopped adjusting her cap. The winner has been chosen, the dean continued. And before we reveal the work, I want to read the artist's statement submitted with the blueprints. It is brief. He unfolded a piece of paper. The room went dead silent. They told me I was strong enough to build with trash, so I built a fortress from the scraps left behind by those who feasted. My mother stiffened. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible recognition. She remembered those words. She remembered the kitchen, the velvet swatch, the dismissal. Ladies and gentlemen, the dean said. The Citadel. The massive velvet curtain behind him dropped. There was no soft furniture. There were no pastels. Towering over the stage was a 6-foot model made of darkened raw industrial steel. It was jagged, brutal, and breathtakingly complex. It looked like a cathedral built for the end of the world. It was aggressive and undeniable. It was the physical manifestation of my rage, welded together with perfect surgical precision. A gasp rippled through the crowd. It wasn't the polite applause of a gala. It was the shock of seeing something dangerous. "It looks like a prison," my father whispered, horrified. "It looks like power," the stranger next to him said. The man stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He wasn't just a guest. He was the CEO of Vanguard Architects. He walked past my father, past my mother, past a trembling Isabella. He walked straight to the edge of the stage where the dean was waiting. He took the microphone. "Vanguard is proud to purchase this design for $50,000, he said. He turned to the front row. He didn't look at Isabella. He looked directly at me. "Miss Brianna, come accept your commission. You are the future of Chicago." I stood up. My legs were steady. I didn't look at my parents, but I could feel them freezing in my peripheral vision. They were statues of shock crumbling in real time as the daughter they called Sturdy walked past them to accept a check that was worth more than their entire year's salary. The reception was held in the atrium, a glass-walled space that felt less like a celebration and more like an aquarium for the wealthy. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne moving through the crowd of architects, developers, and city officials. I stood near a pillar, the check for $50,000 folded neatly into the inside pocket of my blazer. It felt heavy against my ribs, a physical weight that anchored me to the floor. I watched my parents navigate the room. They were moving with a frantic, brittle energy. They had been exposed in the auditorium, but they were professionals at damage control. I saw them laughing too loudly, touching arms, trying to physically reassemble their image in real time. They were weaving a new narrative, spinning the dean's speech into a story of tough love and parental strategy. They spotted me. They hesitated for a fraction of a second, a glitch in their programming, before the smiles plastered back onto their faces. They marched toward me, flanking Isabella, who looked like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glue-gunned back together. "Brianna," my father's voice was booming, jovial. He threw an arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a side hug for the benefit of the photographers nearby. "There she is, the woman of the hour. We were just telling Mr. Sterling here," he gestured to the CEO who was standing a few feet away, swirling a scotch, "that we always knew you had this in you." "It's true," my mother chimed in, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. She reached out to smooth the lapel of my jacket, a gesture of ownership. "We had to be hard on you, honey. We knew you needed that push. Diamonds are made under pressure, right? If we had coddled you well, if we had made it easy, you never would have built something so powerful." Isabella sniffled, trying to look like a proud sister instead of a jealous casualty. "We're just so proud," she whispered, waiting for her cue. I looked at them. Really looked at them. For years, these people had terrified me. Their approval was the sun I orbited. Their disapproval was a winter that never ended. But standing there with my own money in my pocket and my own name on a commission, the optical illusion failed. I realized I was looking at the illusion of the empty wallet. Their power over me had never been about love or respect or even biology. It was entirely financial. It was the power of having versus being. They had the money, the house, the status. They used those assets to rent authority. But they were nothing. They had no character, no loyalty, no substance. Without the leverage of their checkbook, they were just three insecure people in expensive clothes, terrified that the world would see they were spiritually bankrupt. They weren't strong. They were fragile. And I was the hammer. I didn't push my father's arm away. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "You're right," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the ambient chatter. "You did push me. I actually kept a recording of the moment you inspired me. I listen to it whenever I need motivation." My mother smiled, expecting a compliment. "Oh, really?" "Yes," I said. I tapped the screen. I had the volume turned all the way up. The audio quality was crisp. It sliced through the cocktail music like a knife. "Isabella's environment affects her mood, Brianna. You're strong enough to build with trash. She isn't." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's arm dropped from my shoulder. My mother's smile froze, then cracked, shifting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. It wasn't just that I had played it. It was that Mr. Sterling, the CEO of Vanguard, had stepped closer. He had heard every word. He looked at my mother. He looked at Isabella, who was clutching her designer clutch like a life preserver. Then he looked at me. Trash Sterling repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He shook his head, a look of profound disgust settling on his features. I see where you get your resilience, Miss Brianna. It certainly wasn't from the support of your investors. He turned his back on them. It was a dismissal more violent than a slap. Isabella let out a sob, a sharp, wounded sound meant to draw sympathy. In any other room, it might have worked. But this was a room of serious people, of builders and creators. To them, her tears didn't look tragic. They looked like a tantrum. They looked like a facade crumbling because it had no foundation. My parents shrank. I watched them diminish in real time, stripping away their height and their volume until they were just small, petty strangers. I think you should go, I said. You're cluttering the design. I turned away and walked toward the bar. I didn't look back to see if they left. They were no longer relevant to the structure. I accepted the job at Vanguard Architects the next morning. I didn't ask for time to think. I didn't negotiate. I knew the value of the contract, and I signed it with the same pen I used to sketch my steel fortress. The first thing I did with the $50,000 was pay off my student loans. I logged into the portal, typed in the full amount, and clicked submit. Watching the balance hit zero didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like unbolting a heavy door. I was debt-free. I was leverage-free. I moved out of the studio and into a high-rise apartment in the Loop. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and concrete floors. It is cold, modern, and quiet. From my living room, I can see the steel mill where I worked the graveyard shift. It looks small from up here, just a gray smudge against the river. As for my parents, their decline was structural and rapid. Mr. Sterling, it turned out, was not just a powerful architect. He was a powerful storyteller. He didn't file a lawsuit. He simply told the truth over scotch at the city's most exclusive clubs. He told everyone about the parents who starved their genius daughter to buy velvet sofas. In Chicago, reputation is currency. And my parents were bankrupt within a month. The invitations stopped coming. The galas stopped calling. They were left alone in their house with their expensive furniture and their cheap reputations. Isabella didn't last the semester. Without me there to fix her mistakes or draft her layouts, she failed her midterm review. The professors at the institute aren't charmed by tears. They are impressed by work. She dropped out before finals. I heard she moved back home, back to the only place where her facade still holds up. I haven't spoken to them. I haven't blocked them either. I just let their emails pile up in the paper trail folder, unread and irrelevant. They are data points from a project I have already archived. Sometimes late at night I stand by the window and look at the skyline I now help design. People often think revenge is about destruction. They think it's about lighting a match and watching your enemy's house burn down. But that's messy. That's emotional. True revenge is construction. This is the justice of the builder. I realized that if I had spent my energy trying to destroy them, I would still be living on their level. I would still be in the dirt fighting with them. Instead, I took all that rage, all that silence, and I used it as fuel to build something vertical. I built a skyscraper of a life so high that when they look up, they can't even see my face. They can only see the steel and the glass shining in the sunday. They are stuck on the ground floor arguing over scraps while I am up here drafting the future. I am not their daughter anymore. I am not their investment. I am the architect of my own salvation. And the view from here is flawless. If you are currently building your way out of a dark place, type "I am building" in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to know their blueprint is worth more than their family's approval.